Good morning from New York and welcome to STARCAST from Planet Waves. I'm Eric Francis Coppolino, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, here with a special edition for the morning of Monday, the 25th of November, 2024. And putting out an edition a little bit on the fly associated with Mercury stationing retrograde tonight. I'm aware that early in the day Monday is not the world's best time to publish anything. However, it is the time that I have, and also the information will be more useful to you if you have a little bit of advance notice. Of course, half a day is not that much advance notice. Mercury stations retrograde at 9:42:12. That is to say 9:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this evening. There's a lot of mythology around Mercury retrograde and the usual haze of disinformation associated with the internet and everybody having an opinion and very few people having facts have contributed to a kind of a chaotic theory around Mercury retrograde that is somewhat based on earlier theories. You know, Debbie Kempton Smith, don't sign, don't buy, Mercury is retrograde. Yeah, I would say avoid signing and avoid making major purchases, but there's a reason for that I'll hopefully remember to get to in a second. The thing with interplanet retrogrades is that far from being times when things are destined to go wrong, we have a time when there is a built-in structured phase of review and completion. And Mercury retrograde is just perfect for this. I have found tracking Mercury retrograde since well before I was an astrologer. I've been paying attention to Mercury retrograde since I fell into the thrall of Florence Higgins, the editor of the Echo Sentinel, in early 1987, and kept paying attention as best I could without having an ephemeris clear through to the time that I started taking up astrology in 94, is that you want to use this time to finish existing projects, to catch up with yourself, to clear your desk, by which I mean the piles, clear away the backlog of filing, the projects that have been left incomplete, get them to a point where they are either one step further along, or where you neatly stash the whole thing in a folder somewhere and then make a note to come back to it, or just simply wrap up. They are very helpful times for doing this kind of wrapping up business, clearing away the dross, the jetsam, and the flotsam off of the desk of any busy person that collects this kind of stuff, and then at the same time not initiating new business. That's the part about don't sign the contract. It's better not to make a commitment, because you're in this time when you need to be evaluating the contract, evaluating the terms of the commitment, but also because one of the most important things about Mercury retrograde that I have found, and I say this in the context of being a journalist all throughout my career as an astrologer, because I started as a journalist about 12 years earlier, doing really intense stories, many layered stories, multiple sources, and freedom of information law requests, and things like that, that around the time of Mercury stationing, either retrograde, being stationary, which it's not really stationary, but it looks like it, stationary retrograde, or direct, it is as if there is a little kind of thing that opens up and hidden or missing information comes out. Hence, Mercury retrogrades are a good time to investigate things. They are a good time to look for things that are missing. And they are a good time to put the pieces together without necessarily driving toward an outcome, but just sorting things out a bit and getting a handle on what is so. And if you do that and you keep your mind open, you will make discoveries. So, for example, the reason to not sign a major commitment or contract 4 or 5 days before Mercury stations direct, unless you absolutely have to, unless that is it, that is the time of the mortgage closing, and that's it. You're done. It's not going to happen, and you're really, really attached to it. That's another topic. That sense of it must be in the attachment and all that. But the reason to not sign 3, 4, 5 weeks before, even an hour before, is that you're going to make a discovery after you signed that would have been relevant to your decision whether or not you signed. It would have been something you would have addressed in the discussion, addressed in the negotiation. And so in situations where possible, where you can have a kind of a mutual agreement to solve things that do happen to come up, and say the 3 weeks after an agreement is signed with Mercury still retrograde, you can say, well, we'll fix that when we get there, or something. But you can't, if you've closed on a house and there's actually something wrong, you can't go back on that. That's it. It's a done deal. Once even the contract is signed, it's a done deal. Once the closing is done, it's a done deal. And so the way to handle that is you have to be prepared for things to go differently than you planned, which can translate to for things to go wrong, but at least to go differently. And you have to plan for it and budget for it and realize that you took is it a calculated risk or an uncalculated risk? It's hard to say because you don't really know. You're looking, you're kind of like looking right at the blind spot, but it helps to know the blind spot is there. What I have found characteristically with things that seem to come to fruition and are ready for action with Mercury retrograde is that if I say, hey, let's take this up in 3 weeks, or let's take this up in a month, and we come back to it, it really actually turned out to be no great loss, or there was some serious, significant problem. That said, Mercury retrograde is a good time to get over on people, and you just, you hustle them along. If getting over on people is what you're into, this is a good time to get over on people because they're likely to not fully comprehend what they're missing, or they'll yield to your seeming expertise. Okay, so let's consider for a moment whether things actually do go wrong more often with Mercury retrograde. Now, I am not entirely trusting of the New York Times, but I go on still, even at this late date, go on a story-by-story basis and evaluate what the article says, and you take the information for what it's worth. And once, maybe about 10 years ago, they did an article, probably findable in the index, where they wanted to see if there are actually more late trains and late airplanes and mishaps with Mercury retrograde. And it turned out that they, contacted Metro North and various other transportation authorities, and found out that actually no, there are no more late trains, planes, and automobiles structurally during Mercury retrograde than there are without it. Which leads to my main theory of Mercury retrograde, which is how, on the one hand, can it be associated with, for example, an engine or another system breaking down, and also be associated with back in the day when people mailed checks. You thought the check was missing. It actually was stuck in the middle of a magazine, and you go through all the trouble to get the check replaced, and you get the person who wrote the check to write a new check, and then the new check comes, and then you pick up your copy of Our Little Homes magazine, and you find the check stuck in there. So what does the perception of travel delays and the perception of things breaking down, disk drives failing, have to do with an envelope stuck in between the pages of a magazine? They're very different things. Well, you're the thing they have in common. And so one of the things I have added to my discussion of what do you do with Mercury retrograde is that you slow down, you be more careful, you read the fine print, and you make provisions for things that you might not know and or that might not work out exactly according to plan. And I haven't done a study on all the things that were actually commenced or when contracts were signed with Mercury retrograde to study what those things were. But I have learned, if I'm going to buy something important that I need to live with, like a camera body, that I'm going to have, I'm going to be using it every day for 5 years, it's going to be an integral part of my life, to wait and or get the enhanced contract. One service contract. One of my favorite stories of Mercury retrograde is when I rented my one and only photo studio, Blue Studio, on North Front Street in Kingston. And we negotiated all the arrangements on the lease and all that with Mercury retrograde. Yep. And my landlord at the time, now one of the wealthiest men in Kingston, was just kind of your average guy with 3 partners on this building that I was renting a little studio for $800 a month in it. And they were all good guys. They're all very nice guys. And we liked each other genuinely. And I said, look, it goes against my professional ethics to do something that I would advise a client not to do, which is to sign this lease with Mercury retrograde. Can we do it with Mercury direct? Can you write a check? No, writing the check is what makes the difference. So they're like, all right, fine. Easter Sunday is the day that we had the meeting. And I convinced these guys, okay, we're going to meet in the studio on Easter Sunday. And it turns out that my then landlord, Stefan Sanzi, now a good friend, this was his first ever lease going into business as a property owner, property manager. I was his first tenant, his first customer. Well, this was also, without realizing it, it was my first photo studio. Okay, that's somewhat important. But for Stefan, it was the beginning of an entire career for him. And the signing of that contract is the inception date of his business. Turns out that this guy Dominic, no longer in the business, Renato left the business, sadly passed away over the summer. Stefan bought them out. Then he subdivided the building, sold that building off, went strictly into residential, continued his business, and now is one of the most successful and best landlords in Kingston. Anybody comes to Kingston needs a place to live, I send them straight to Stefan because he's such a good landlord. When was the last time you heard anybody say that? So this is the kind of thing to think about. And it's not so much don't do it with Mercury a certain way, and not that you're up to the astrology of this, but I am. This is what I do as a consultant. The whole situation goes better. The studio had a brilliant run. I took some incredible pictures in this room, had some of the best times of my life, and Stefan winds up a successful person. If we'd signed it the day before, would it have been different? Maybe not. But as in chaos theory, the core concept of astrology is that the conditions at the outset influence or determine the conditions at the outcome. So I think it's worth paying attention to this. And I realize it can be inconvenient, and you don't necessarily want to be advertising that, this is what my astrologer said, but I have found that most of the time you don't need to say anything. You just say, yeah, let me get back to you on this, or you keep the discussion going in some way, and or prepare to find out what you do not know today. Okay, let's take a short look. I'm committed to keeping this short, given that it's a Monday, I'm not going to go 45 minutes. I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes here. This is a Think Big, Dream Big Mercury retrograde. The whole thing happens in Sagittarius. That is Think Big, Dream Big enough. And Mercury is stationing retrograde in between the direction of two deep space points, as I went over last week in the regular edition STARCAST. And the deep space points, they're different ideas. They're different points. One is called the galactic center. The galactic center is at 27 degrees of Sag. That is the center of our galaxy, our little local few hundred billion stars, our little spiral island in space and time, the Milky Way galaxy. Back a few degrees, at 14 degrees, is this other thing called the Great Attractor. The Great Attractor is like a massive intergalactic point that is a gravitational center that holds together about 100,000 galaxies. The massive superstructure, which connects to every other superstructure in the universe, but that's our little part, our little bay in the universe, is called Laniakea. It was named that by Dr. Brent Tully. You can easily Google Eric Francis interviews Brent Tully. It should come right up. If you can't find it, write to me. And he is the astrophysicist who has led the Great Attractor team, kind of the second wave of the Great Attractor team in the more modern era, the 2010s into the present day, professor at the University of Hawaii. We had a fantastic conversation about the Great Attractor and Laniakea. So, in effect, these are both deep space points. They have a similar kind of a spiritualizing effect, and the sense that things are really too big to comprehend. But they have a little bit different flavors. For example, if you've got a hot spot at 14 degrees of the mutable signs, that would be 14 degrees of Sag, Pisces, Virgo, or Gemini, you have a zone of protection there. You have a place where someone can attempt to pursue you, or they can be envious, they can be jealous, they can seek to be competitive with you, but they can't catch up with you. They cannot actually harm you. So, you have to understand your chart fairly well to be able to translate that into reality. But in any event, I would sum this up as with Mercury stationing retrograde right in the sweet spot between these two deep space points. Think really big. I agree. It's not easy to think really big. I have thought small for much of my career. I know it may not sound that way. That's partly because I'm not really ambitious and I'm not competitive. I just like to do things well. So that's my idea of thinking big. Also, in this pattern, there are a few other points, and I haven't read the chart for this yet. And with this, I will jump out, scan this chart, and move on with both of our days. First of all, Jupiter is retrograde, and it is retrograde in Gemini. Mercury is retrograde. It is retrograde in Sagittarius. There is happening now, and will be happening basically for the next couple of weeks, Mercury opposite Jupiter, with both points retrograde. So this is another one of those aspects that says, really do your best to get to the bottom of things and don't make assumptions. Really find out what is down there. And what is so interesting is that these points are both going to be retrograde, lined up with the Great Attractor. Let me pause the recording and get the date of that. Now, I don't know what good this information is, but you may see that there's some kind of a developing story here. The first time they were opposite was November 18th. Then they'll be opposite on December the 4th. December the 4th, by the way, is just before Mars stations retrograde. So we have Mars stationing retrograde on 12/6, and just ahead of that, Mercury and Jupiter in an opposition. So I'll wrap up with Mars retrograde in a second. So that's saying, pay attention. Just pay attention. Know when you don't know. Write it on your mirror, write it on your forehead, write it on your windshield. Know when you don't know. You should stop there should be an uneasy feeling when you don't know. And one of the, having thought this through a lot for the purpose of training investigative reporters, is how do you know when you don't know? This is a paradox, right? How do you know you don't know something? Well, the way that you do that is you take something that you think you know and you verify it, and then you find out whether you actually know something. So this requires ordinary garden variety fact-checking. While Mercury and Jupiter are at an opposition, they are in an aspect to the centaur Nessus. Nessus is about consequences. Nessus is about things returning to their source. Nessus has, given by Melanie Reinhart, my dear friend, the buck stops here. So this is about taking accountability for the decisions that you make and for having done your due diligence. Very few people do this, and they just figure, well, things have gone okay up to this point. Whatever, I'll just sign. Well, it depends on how important it is, and sometimes you don't know how important things are. So Nessus is in the picture. Nessus is in Pisces, by the way. It's basically 17 degrees of Pisces. And again, that is the reminder, the buck stops with you. And because the buck stops with you, that's why you have to know when you don't know. All right, one last note about Mars retrograde. So Mars stations retrograde on 12/6. That's a Friday. And Mars retrograde is about resetting desire, figuring out what it is that you want. Mars is retrograde the second least of all the planets, about 9% of the time. It'll be retrograde from 12/6 out to February 23rd. There's a margin on either side of that this wise to honor the Mars retrograde phenomenon. So you could say Mars retrograde sums up as know what you want, and that means figure out what you want. All right, today I have an exciting day working on the Libra reading for the Awakening. This is my annual, beautiful, affordable, helpful astrology readings that will demonstrate for you the value of astrology, the value of having information. You will find out the things that I am saying in the Awakening sooner or later. The idea with astrology is to have the information sooner, to have the advantage of the information sooner. Also, as you know, I am very oriented on what you might call personal growth, but that really means feeling better. It means working out situations that are giving you a hard time, that you have found difficult to resolve. And I think that in my definition of personal growth, it also amounts to communication in your relationships and living closer to your potential. And 2025, 2026 is all about human potential. It is about you being the best or the most fulfilled or that you can be. And I realize we are in a time when it seems like there is no future and no hope. But I would say do not fall for that. Signing off from a beautiful, cool day in Kingston, New York, I'm Eric Francis. Lots of love, and bye for now.